What would happen if you suddenly couldn't breathe oxygen? You'd have about 3 minutes before your brain starts dying, 4 minutes, and permanent damage sets in, 10 minutes, and it's over. Game over. No second chances. Your body needs oxygen constantly, every single second. Your heart beats about 100,000 times a day, and each beat requires oxygen. Your brain uses 20% of all the oxygen you breathe, just to keep you thinking. Right now, as you watch this video, trillions of tiny cellular factories called mitochondria are burning oxygen to keep you alive. Stop breathing, and those factories shut down. Your cells start dying within minutes. Your organs fail. Your consciousness fades. This is the price we pay for being oxygen-dependent life forms. But what if I told you that right now, while you're breathing to stay alive, there are creatures on this planet that are thriving without a single breath of oxygen? Not holding their breath. Not struggling. Not surviving in spite of the lack of oxygen. Actually living their entire lives, from birth to death, in places where oxygen doesn't exist at all. In the next 20 minutes, you're going to discover 7 organisms that have broken biology's most fundamental rule. And by the end, you'll understand why scientists believe these creatures might hold the secret to human survival in space, revolutionary medical treatments, and life on alien worlds. Why this matters. 1:15-3. Here's what they don't teach you in school. Oxygen isn't just what we breathe. It's the fuel for almost every living cell on Earth. The process is called cellular respiration, and it's happening inside you right now. Your mitochondria, those cellular factories I mentioned, they take glucose from your food and oxygen from your lungs, and they burn them together to create ATP, the energy molecule that powers everything you do. Every thought, every heartbeat, every movement, all powered by oxygen. This isn't optional. This is Biology 101. No oxygen equals no ATP. No ATP equals no energy. No energy equals no life. That's the equation we've all been taught since elementary school. That's the rule. Except, nature doesn't care about our rules. The creatures we're about to explore have rewritten the fundamental code of existence. Some have evolved completely different energy systems that don't use oxygen at all. Others have modified their cells in ways that seem physically impossible. And one of them, and this is completely true, has actually deleted the genetic instructions for oxygen breathing entirely. Just remove them from its DNA, like deleting a file from your computer. These aren't hypothetical organisms. These aren't science fiction. They're real. They're alive right now, and they're about to change everything you thought you knew about what it means to be alive. Because if these creatures can survive without oxygen, what else is possible? What other supposedly fundamental rules of biology are just optional? Creature number 1, Loricifera, 3/5, 15. Let's start our journey at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Not just the bottom, we're going more than 3,000 meters down to a place called the Latelant Basin. This isn't your typical ocean floor. This is a brine pool, a lake of super salty water sitting at the bottom of the ocean. The salt concentration here is so high that it's denser than regular seawater, so it pools at the bottom like an underwater Dead Sea. And it's been sitting there, undisturbed, for thousands of years, long enough that all the oxygen has been consumed, long enough that hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas that smells like rotten eggs and kills most life on contact, has built up to lethal concentrations. This is a dead zone, or at least it should be. But in 2010, scientists discovered something impossible living there. 3 species of microscopic animals called Loricifera. These creatures are smaller than a grain of sand, invisible to the naked eye, but they're not bacteria. They're not single-celled organisms. They're complex, multicellular animals with nervous systems, digestive tracts, and muscles. And they live their entire lives in water with 0 oxygen. Not low oxygen, not occasional oxygen deprivation. 0. None. Not a single molecule. Here's what makes this absolutely mind-blowing. When scientists first found them, they thought the Loricifera had just accidentally wandered into the brine pool and died. That would make sense, right? But when they examined the specimens more closely, They found eggs. These creatures weren't just dying there. They were reproducing there. They were thriving. How? Scientists discovered that instead of mitochondria, these loricifera have different organelles that resemble something called hydrogenosomes. These are structures that some single-celled organisms use to generate energy without oxygen. But finding them in a multicellular animal? That was completely unprecedented. Think about what this means. Your body would shut down in minutes without oxygen. These creatures have lived their entire evolutionary history, possibly millions of years, without ever needing it. They're not adapting to oxygen deprivation. They've evolved beyond oxygen dependency entirely. They've essentially swapped out their entire cellular power grid. It's like if you replaced your car's gasoline engine with something that runs on seawater, and it works just as well. Now we're moving from the deep ocean to something even more bizarre. Something that's going to challenge everything you think you know about animal life. Meet Henneguia salminicola. It's an 8mm white parasite that infects the flesh of Chinook salmon. And in 2020, scientists made an announcement that shocked the biological world. This is the first animal ever identified that doesn't use oxygen to breathe. At all. Ever. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. When they sequenced its genome, they found something that should be impossible. This creature has no mitochondria. Zero. None. It doesn't have the genes to make them. It doesn't have the genes to maintain them. It doesn't even have the genes that remember it once had them. Let that sink in for a moment. Every animal you've ever known, every insect, every fish, every bird, every mammal, every reptile, every amphibian, every single animal that has ever existed on Earth has mitochondria. These are the descendants of ancient bacteria that merged with our cells about 1.5 billion years ago in one of the most important events in the history of life. That merger is what made complex life possible. Before mitochondria, life was simple. Single cells, maybe some colonies. After mitochondria, life exploded into an incredible diversity of complex organisms. Mitochondria are what give us the energy to be complex, to have brains and hearts and muscles and all the things that make animals animals. This is fundamental. This is non-negotiable. This is Biology 101 on steroids. Except Henneguia salminicola just said, no thanks, and deleted the whole system. Scientists call this a radical departure from the norm. That's scientific language for, we have no idea how this is even possible, but here it is, living in salmon, and we can't deny it exists. It lives inside salmon muscle tissue, stealing nutrients directly from its host. And somehow, and this is still being researched, it generates energy through a process we don't fully understand yet. It's probably using some form of anaerobic glycolysis, which is what your muscles do when you exercise really hard and run out of oxygen. You know that burning feeling when you sprint? That's your muscles screaming because they're trying to make energy without oxygen, and it hurts. But Henneguia does this all the time, indefinitely. No pain, no problem. Just living its best parasite life without the cellular machinery we thought was absolutely essential for animal existence. This isn't just surprising. This is paradigm-shattering. This is proof that animal life can exist on a completely different biological foundation than we ever imagined possible. You've probably heard of tardigrades. They've become internet famous in recent years, and for good reason. They're called water bears, because under a microscope, they look like microscopic bears, about 0.5 millimeter long, translucent, with 8 stubby legs and a slow, lumbering walk. They're also basically indestructible, and when I say indestructible, I mean it literally. Scientists have subjected tardigrades to conditions that would instantly kill any other animal on Earth, and the tardigrades just don't care. They've been frozen to near absolute zero. We're talking negative 273 degrees Celsius for days, and then thawed out perfectly fine. They've been heated to 150 degrees Celsius, hot enough to boil water and cook meat, and survived. They've been exposed to radiation doses 6,000 times higher than what would kill a human. They've survived pressures 6 times greater than the deepest ocean trenches. And here's the kicker. They've been sent into space, exposed to the vacuum of space and unfiltered cosmic radiation, and when they came back to Earth, they just rehydrated and walked away. But here's what makes them relevant to our story about oxygen. When conditions get extreme, no water, no oxygen, temperatures that would kill anything else, tardigrades do something incredible. They enter a state called cryptobiosis. In this state, they're not technically alive, and they're not dead. They're suspended, paused. Their metabolism drops to 0.01% of normal levels. That's not a typo. They reduce their life processes to 1/10,000th of normal activity. They can stay like this for years, decades even. The longest confirmed cryptobiosis lasted 30 years. A tardigrade was frozen in moss in Antarctica in 1983, and when scientists thawed it out in 2013, it just started moving again like nothing happened. And during all this time, they don't need oxygen. At all. The secret is a molecule called trehalose. When tardigrades sense danger, they pump trehalose throughout their bodies. This sugar molecule replaces almost all the water in their cells, essentially turning them into biological glass. Their cells become stable, protected, suspended in time. When conditions improve, when water and oxygen return, they rehydrate. The glass liquefies back into normal cellular material, and they just resume living, like pressing pause and play on a video. Tardigrades aren't just surviving without oxygen, they're showing us that life can have a pause button, that you can shut down almost entirely and then restart when conditions improve. And if we could ever figure out how to replicate this in humans, everything changes. Space travel becomes dramatically easier. Emergency medicine could preserve patients during transport. We could potentially pause dying people until cures are found for their diseases. This isn't science fiction anymore. This is active research happening right now, inspired by these microscopic creatures that refuse to die. Let's shift gears and talk about something with a backbone, the epaulet shark. This is important because all the other creatures we've discussed so far are relatively simple. But the epaulet shark is a vertebrate, with a brain, a heart, and all the complex systems that usually demand constant oxygen. The epaulet shark lives in the shallow reefs around Australia and Papua New Guinea. These reefs have a problem. When the tide goes out, water gets trapped in small pools. The sun heats these pools up. The fish and other organisms trapped there consume oxygen. And within hours, these pools can become severely oxygen depleted or even completely anoxic. Most fish would panic. They'd thrash around, desperately trying to find oxygen-rich water, burning through their remaining energy and dying quickly. The epaulet shark does something completely different. When oxygen levels drop, it simply slows down, way down. Its heart rate decreases dramatically, its metabolism drops, and it can survive like this for up to an hour without any oxygen at all. Now, an hour might not sound impressive compared to tardigrades that can go decades. But remember, this is a complex vertebrate with a sophisticated brain that normally requires constant oxygen. The human brain starts dying after just 3 to 4 minutes without oxygen. The epaulet shark can go 20 times longer. How does it do this? By redistributing blood flow. When oxygen disappears, the shark prioritizes only the most essential organs, the brain and heart. Everything else gets shut down temporarily. Digestion stops. Muscle activity minimizes. It's like putting your body into airplane mode, shutting down all non-essential apps to save battery. But here's what makes this really exciting for humans. Stroke and heart attack victims die because their brains are deprived of oxygen for just a few minutes. The brain tissue dies, and even if doctors restore blood flow, the damage is permanent. If we could understand and replicate the epaulet shark's mechanism, if we could teach human brains to shut down non-essential functions and survive longer without oxygen, we could potentially save millions of lives every year. We could give ambulances extra time to reach patients. We could give surgeons more time during critical operations. We could revolutionize emergency medicine. Research is already underway. Scientists are studying the shark's brain chemistry, trying to identify the proteins and mechanisms that allow this extended survival. and every discovery brings us closer to applying these lessons to human medicine. Ever seen the bottom of a polluted river? That thick, black, toxic sludge where nothing should be able to live. The water so dirty it looks like motor oil, smells like death, and where even bacteria struggle to survive. That's where you'll find tuberfex worms, also called sludge worms. And when I say find, I mean millions of them. They cluster together in writhing, pulsating masses that look like something out of a horror movie. Red, thread-like creatures, each about 2 to 3 centimeters long, packed so densely that they form a living carpet on the river bottom. These worms live in the most contaminated waterways on Earth. Places where industrial waste, sewage, and agricultural runoff have created dead zones. Zero oxygen, high levels of toxic chemicals, acidic or basic pH levels that would burn your skin. And these worms are thriving. Here's their secret. Tuberfex worms have hemoglobin that's remarkably efficient at grabbing oxygen, about 4 times more efficient than human hemoglobin. If there's even a trace amount of oxygen in the water, they can extract it. But that's not the impressive part. The impressive part is what happens when there's absolutely no oxygen available at all. They switch to a completely different metabolic system. They can respire through their skin using fermentation pathways, essentially the same process that yeast uses to make alcohol and that your muscles use when you sprint and run out of oxygen. You know that burning sensation in your legs when you run really hard? That's lactic acid building up because your muscles are trying to make energy without oxygen. It hurts. It's inefficient. You can't sustain it for more than a minute or two before your muscles just give up. Tuberfex worms can do this indefinitely. Days, weeks, months, as long as necessary. They just switch over to anaerobic metabolism and keep living their lives like nothing's wrong. They're so resilient that environmental scientists use them as indicator species. If you're studying a body of water and you want to know how polluted it is, you look for tuberfex worms. If you find them, you know the pollution is severe. They're literally the last creatures standing before complete biological death. Think about what this means for bioremediation, using living organisms to clean up pollution. If we could understand how tuberfex worms tolerate such extreme toxicity and oxygen deprivation, we might be able to engineer other organisms to help clean up our environmental messes. Or we could use their metabolic pathways to develop new medical treatments. Because their ability to switch between aerobic and anaerobic metabolism at will is exactly what we'd need for treating oxygen deprivation in humans. Now we're going to go deep, not just into the ocean, though we will go there, but into the fundamental tree of life itself. Most people think all life falls into 2 categories, bacteria and everything else. But that's not true. There's a third domain of life, discovered only in the 1970s, called archaea. These organisms are so different from bacteria and everything else that they occupy their own branch on the tree of life. And some of them live in the most extreme environments on Earth. Let's go to a hydrothermal vent at the bottom of the ocean. Picture this. You're 2,500 meters below the surface. It's pitch black. The pressure is crushing, about 250 times atmospheric pressure. And from cracks in the ocean floor, superheated water erupts, reaching temperatures of 400 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt lead. In this water, dissolved minerals precipitate out, forming chimney-like structures called black smokers. The water around these vents is toxic, filled with hydrogen sulfide, methane, heavy metals, and other chemicals that would kill surface life instantly. There's no sunlight, no photosynthesis, no oxygen, and there's life. Thriving, abundant, diverse life. At the base of this ecosystem are chemosynthetic archaea. These organisms don't breathe oxygen. They don't need sunlight. Instead, they use chemicals, hydrogen sulfide, methane, hydrogen gas, as their energy source. They literally eat rocks and volcanic gases. The chemical reactions they use are completely different from anything in your body. Where your cells burn glucose with oxygen to make energy, these archaea oxidize sulfur compounds or reduce carbon dioxide with hydrogen. It's chemistry we barely understood was possible until we found these organisms doing it. Some of these archaea live at temperatures that would cook you instantly. Others survive in frozen Antarctic lakes, buried under kilometers of ice. They've been found in rocks miles beneath the Earth's surface, living on traces of hydrogen generated by radioactive decay. They're in volcanic hot springs where the water is boiling and acidic enough to dissolve metal. They're in salt deposits so concentrated that water would be sucked out of your cells instantly. They're in petroleum deposits deep underground, slowly eating fossil fuels. Here's why this matters so much. These organisms might be closer to the original form of life on Earth than we are. 4 billion years ago, Earth's atmosphere had almost no oxygen. It was filled with volcanic gases, carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen sulfide. The oceans were anoxic. The planet was hot and violent. The first living things had to make do with what was available. And that means they probably looked a lot like these archaea, chemosynthetic organisms that use minerals and gases for energy instead of oxygen. Which means oxygen-breathing life, us, animals, most plants, we're the weird ones, we're the biological newcomers. These archaea represent the ancient way, the original way, the way life worked for billions of years before oxygen became abundant. And if life started this way on Earth, it could start the same way on Mars, or Europa, or Enceladus, or any of the hundreds of exoplanets we're discovering. We're not looking for oxygen-rich worlds anymore. We're looking for worlds with liquid water and chemical energy sources, because that's all life really needs. Let's bring this back to something that affects humans directly. Something that might be living inside someone you know right now. Meet Ascaris lumbricoides, a parasitic roundworm that infects over 1 billion people worldwide. That's not a typo. 1 billion. It's one of the most common human parasites on Earth, particularly prevalent in developing countries with poor sanitation. This worm can grow up to 35 centimeters long, that's over a foot, and it lives in human intestines. And the human intestine is not a nice place to live. It's crowded, acidic, full of digestive enzymes, and critically for our purposes, it's very low in oxygen. The inner lining of your intestine gets oxygen from your blood, but the stuff in the middle, the digesting food, the bacteria, everything floating around in there, that's essentially oxygen-free. And that's where Ascaris lives, for years, growing, reproducing, stealing your nutrients. Ascaris has what scientists call metabolic flexibility. When oxygen is available, it uses aerobic respiration, just like you do. But when oxygen disappears, which is most of the time in an intestine, it switches seamlessly to anaerobic pathways. During these anaerobic periods, Ascaris produces energy by fermenting carbohydrates, similar to how yeast makes alcohol. It's not as efficient as aerobic respiration, but it works. And importantly, Ascaris can switch back and forth instantly depending on oxygen availability. Now you might be thinking, why should I care about a parasitic worm? 3 reasons. First, medically. Ascaris and other parasitic worms cause massive health problems globally, particularly in children. Understanding how they survive in low-oxygen environments helps researchers develop better treatments. If we can disrupt their anaerobic metabolism specifically, we can kill them without harming the human host. Second, metabolically. These parasites are teaching us about metabolic flexibility, the ability to switch between different energy-producing pathways. In the future, if humans ever need to adapt to low-oxygen environments, whether in deep-sea habitats, underground colonies, or on other planets, understanding how organisms like Ascaris switch between aerobic and anaerobic metabolism could be literally life-saving. And third, evolutionary. The fact that such a common, successful parasite has evolved this flexibility shows that oxygen-independent metabolism isn't some rare, exotic adaptation. It's actually pretty common in nature. We just don't notice it because we're so focused on oxygen-breathing life. Ascaris is showing us that the line between oxygen-dependent and oxygen-independent life isn't as sharp as we thought. There's a whole spectrum of organisms that can do both, switching as needed. And that flexibility might be the key to survival in uncertain or changing environments. Let's bring this home. We've explored 7 incredible organisms today. Let me quickly remind you what we've discovered. The Loricifera, microscopic animals living in toxic Mediterranean brine pools with zero oxygen, proving that complex multicellular life doesn't need oxygen at all. Heneguia salmonicola, the parasite that completely deleted mitochondria from its genome and survives perfectly fine in salmon, rewriting the rules of what it means to be an animal. Tardigrades, the microscopic superheroes that can pause their lives indefinitely, surviving for decades without oxygen in a state between life and death. Epaulette sharks, showing us that even complex vertebrates with sophisticated brains can survive extended periods without oxygen by shutting down non-essential systems. Tubifex worms, thriving in the most polluted environments on Earth by switching seamlessly between oxygen-dependent and oxygen-independent metabolism. Extremophile archaea, ancient organisms living in volcanic vents and other hostile environments, using chemistry instead of oxygen to power their cells, showing us what life looked like billions of years ago and what it might look like on alien worlds. And Ascaris, the common human parasite, demonstrating that metabolic flexibility, the ability to survive with or without oxygen, is more common than we ever realized. These 7 organisms share something profound. They've all found ways to break what we thought was biology's most fundamental rule. They've shown us that oxygen dependence isn't a requirement for life. It's just one option among many. Right now, you're breathing about 15 times per minute, taking in oxygen to fuel every cell in your body. You can't stop. You can't pause. You don't have a choice. Your life depends on an uninterrupted supply of this one molecule. But somewhere in the depths of the ocean, in toxic sediments, inside living hosts, in volcanic vents, and in environments we can barely imagine, there are creatures that have freed themselves from that constraint. They've rewritten the code. They've found another way. They've proven that the rules we thought were absolute are actually just guidelines. And that means we might too. In the coming decades, as we push further into space, deeper into the oceans, and face environmental changes we can barely predict, these oxygen-independent organisms might hold the keys to our survival. They're not just biological curiosities. They're proof that life finds a way, even when all the rules say it's impossible. They're showing us that the universe is more diverse, more creative, and more full of possibilities than we ever dared to imagine. So the next time you take a breath, remember, you're participating in just one of many possible ways to exist. And if nature has taught us anything, it's that impossible is just another problem waiting for an evolutionary solution.